It is a truth universally acknowledged that Australia is a sporting nation. In Australia, in order to be a properly accredited member of society with human rights and so on, you've got to either play sport or watch sport. Ask anyone. Australians love their sport. I'm a typical example. I'm obsessed with sport. I'm doing a television program about sport. I love sport, always have. Played a bit of sport as a kid. Could have been great, but, you know, you can't do everything. But I love my sport. We all do, I think. I'm from New Zealand. Australia is not the only country to be obsessed with sport, but it is the only country called Australia to be obsessed with sport, and it is obsessed with sport in a very Australian way. This might be a positive reflection of the Australian lifestyle and the genius of its people, or possibly a limitation, an escape, and maybe part of the problem. To understand Australia's relationship with sport, we'll go back to a golden age in which Australians discovered how good they were at sport and were confirmed in their belief in the country's natural advantages and overall excellence in all things. What happens to this national confidence when the sports results aren't there to support it is something we'll discuss when we get into the therapy part of the story. It's easy to see how Australia got this idea, though. There was a time when we won everything that wasn't nailed down. August 2011. Cadel Evans has just become the first person from outside Europe or the US to win the Tour de France. He's returned to this modest gathering in the streets as he attempts to duck out for some milk and a paper. This is a scene that's been repeated again and again in Australia over more than 100 years. Sometimes it's been a cricket team, sometimes a runner, a group of footballers. Occasionally it's been a horse. This seems to be what we do, what we celebrate, what we most value.
One of the reasons why sport is such a central aspect of the culture is because there has been a lack of competing narratives here. You know, we have a scattering of war heroes, one or two sort of isolated cultural figures, but there has always been an audience for sport.
Perhaps it is only through sport that Australia exists as a nation. And perhaps it is in sport that we see best reflected our history. Set up as a dumping ground for the unwanted of England, in a country whose Indigenous population was said not to exist, and were then hunted down because they did, post-colonial Australia's first sporting rivalry was with Britain, in British sports.
Sport is so incredibly versatile because it allows Australia to explore both its imperial fealty, but also its desire for difference, its desire for independence from England.
Sir Donald Bradman.
Don Bradman was so good at humiliating the English bowling attack that he was knighted. A nice irony that works both ways.
We are very glad indeed. In fact, I cannot tell you how delighted we are to be back in England once again.
There's been no one else in any sport, in the history of sport, who has been so far ahead of the rest of the field as Bradman was in cricket.
And no sportsman in history has led a life so impeccably free of scandal. To cricket and to Australia in general, he's been the gift that keeps on giving.
458 is the total, out of which Bradman has made 309 not out.
Bradman's feats sustained Australia through the Depression and the war. In the Second World War, 60 million people were killed. As Europe recovered and rebuilt itself, it was the New World countries that would do well in sport.
At the end of the war, Europe was devastated, both West and the Eastern Bloc countries, physically devastated, were not well fed for many years, and the Asian countries had no wealth, basically, at that stage, or the African countries. And so it really was Australia and America.
It's Youth Week at the Showground in Melbourne.
Australia was moving away from its dependence on Britain and was developing a brave, new dependence on America. And another thing was happening. During the war, women had worked in positions once occupied only by men, in factories, in industry, in teaching and on the land. Sport was no exception.
In the sunny town of Lithgow in the state of New South Wales.
In 1952, Marjorie Jackson from Lithgow in New South Wales went to the Helsinki Olympics, which were in Helsinki. She won both the 100 and 200 metre sprints, both in world record time. She was the first Australian woman to win an Olympic gold medal on the track ever, and the first Australian to do so since 1896.
To stand on that Olympic dais and see your flag go up and you're so far away from home, it's a moment in time that I'll never, ever forget, ever.
Marjorie Jackson returns home to Lithgow, New South Wales, where bouquets, both floral and verbal, await the local girl who won 2 gold medals for Australia.
And then to get to my home at Lithgow and see about 18 to 20,000 people there, I was overcome with it all, and the excitement back in Australia was absolutely unbelievable. It brought great joy to our country.
Local athletes lift her out of the car and carry her shoulder high through the crowd.
My photo was first in the paper when I won the country championship at 15, and I thought I was someone having a photo in the paper, and I think my dad saw the way it affected me, and he said, "Come into the lounge room, I want to speak to you." And I went in the lounge room and he just said, "Now, I have seen the way you have reacted to one photo." He said, "God gives us all a gift, and yours just happens to be running. You are no better than anybody else, and don't you ever forget it." And looking back, that was the wisest piece of advice any parent could give a child, because it never affected me in any way. And that's what they used to play up in the papers, that I didn't seem to be aware of how famous I was, but actually, what is fame?
One of the features of our sporting heroes is they've come from humble origins and perhaps then shone on the world stage, but never lost that inherent humility that goes with being a boy or a girl from the bush.
Marjorie Jackson wasn't just playing against England. She beat the best athletes from every country in the world, and she set a new standard for Australian athletes. Best in the world. This was the start of the golden age. Kids from everywhere were about to be Pied Pipered from towns and suburbs and houses just like ours, and a lot of them would go on to become household names.
Because we didn't have any heater pools in those days, a lot of my cousins' mates used to work down at the Balmain Power Station, and they used to let the hot water out every Saturday afternoon. The water used to run out very quickly, and we used to dive in one end and then try and swim against the current, and that made us very strong swimmers. It was good fun. You had to stay away from the ends because we was always told that there were sharks at the end waiting to nip our feet, so it made us swim really hard against the current.
Young Australian athletes who dreamed of going to the Olympics themselves would shortly be able to do so in the privacy of their own country.
Melbourne, a city of 1.5 million people, will have the honour of presenting the first Olympic Games of ancient and modern times in the Southern Hemisphere.
It was an exciting time because we weren't used to significant international events of any kind happening in Australia.
Well, Mr. Holt, 12 months from today, the Games will have begun.
Yes, that's quite true. And when we look back in the past 12 months ago and realise that we hadn't anywhere near so much to show for it, I'm sure that Melbourne will do a very good job in the end.
Yes, I think our preparations are well and truly up to schedule.
Couldn't agree more, boys. It all seems to be going along beautifully, although that bloke with the hammer might need to slow down a bit. Somebody could get hurt.
November the 22nd, 1956, and the weather has broken. The sun shines benignly.
The Melbourne Olympics was the big bang in the relationship between sport and Australian culture and identity. We didn't know how we'd go. We'd never done anything like this before, but we were very excited to have everyone here at our place.
I guess what's striking about the Melbourne Olympics is that positions Australia beautifully on the international stage.
I remember walking down the streets of Melbourne, like Burke Street, and seeing these athletic-looking figures in tracksuits with the names of every country in the world written across their back. And it was an incredibly exciting thing for an 18-year-old bloke to do. I had to slip into the pub and have a couple of beers. I got so excited.
As manager Bill Uren leads the huge Australian contingent onto the track.
I guess it was the proudest moment in my life, was to be able to walk out there, to walk up the tunnel and just, once our flag hit the ground at the opening of the tunnel, the roar of the crowd was just amazing. I mean, I just get goosebumps in the back of my neck when I think about it.
Here in the land of the Southern Cross, we await the arrival of the Olympic flame.
I remember going with getting great pleasure.
Did you go to the 1956 Olympics?
Yeah, I'm a pretty old fella, mate.
I declare open the Olympic Games of Melbourne.
My teacher thought I showed some promise as a runner, so he smuggled me in.
I was doing all right. I was sort of the best nationally at my age, but I just left school. I just hated school, and so when I finished school, I felt a huge release, which again made me want to go out with girls, drink beer and smoke fags. I mean, it was all part of that release type thing. My path of life could have gone anywhere, I think. And I think 56 Olympics maybe helped me to reset my direction.
We swear that we will take part in the true spirit of sportsmanship.
All this pomp and circumstance didn't alter the fact that the Cold War was at its height. And in fact, the Soviet Union had just invaded Hungary a fortnight before the opening ceremony. The Australian crowd gave the Hungarian team a special cheer. Indigenous Australians weren't included in the census and didn't have a vote in some parts of the country, but we were very moved by the plight of the Hungarians. In the first week at the track, young Australians in the crowd were impressed by distance runner Vladimir Kutz, physical endurance and mental toughness. A lot of Australian kids would go on to specialise in these areas.
5,000 metres final.
I saw Kutz decimate the field in the 5,000 metres, and that was awesome. It was frightening to see.
The opposition has dropped out of calculation, and the Russian is full steam for the finish line.
He was remorseless. He just ruthlessly, remorselessly, unstoppably ground his opponent into the dirt. And there was something not nice inside me. Got a bit fired up about all that, and there was a little bit of me thought, geez, I'd love to be able to do something as good as that, and as competitive as that.
His hand goes up in salute to the crowd who have watched a new champion break another Olympic record.
It inspired the bastard in me, I suspect.
The Australian crowd was in for a very pleasant surprise in the women's sprint events.
The crowd are on their toes as an Australian, Betty Cuthbert, lane 4 from the inside, is favoured to win.
There were two highlights about the women's 100 metres. Starter was Chips Rafferty. The other highlight was the result.
Australia's Cuthbert is well clear from teammate Matthews, gaining ground on Stupnik of Germany.
Australia did better at these Olympics than in any before or since. Legends were created, left, right and centre.
Superlative hurtling into a headwind. Gradually Cuthbert with mouth wide open comes abreast and draws ahead.
Australia and Germany. Australia.
They get the verdict and then hear that it's a world record.
But it was in the pool that we truly dominated, winning every single freestyle event. At the end of these Olympics, we were the cleanest nation in the world.
Hendricks first, Devitt second, Chapman third. Australia 1, 2 and 3.
But watch Dawn Fraser go.
I think the reason that we're great at swimming is our history. And I think it's born of the days in the 1950s, the Melbourne Olympic Games, where young kids watched, absolutely captured in the moment of the Olympic Games, and saw these wonderful swimmers that were winning gold medals. You know, people like John Hendricks that won the 100 freestyle in 1956, good-looking guy. You know, that's enough to get all the girls signing up to do swimming. Dawn Fraser, a bit rebellious, you know, everyone loves to have a Dawn in their life. You know, people like Rose also a great-looking guy, you know. We were dominating across the board, and kids wanted to be like those athletes, those swimmers.
It was an extraordinary time, and Australians came from all over the country down to Melbourne, and they filled the pool just for training sessions, and it was something that we'd never experienced before.
Women's 100-metre freestyle final. Fraser in lane 4 and Crapp in 5.
It was just a wonderful feeling when I finished swimming, and I won the 100 metres. And the starter came over to me, George, and he said, "Hey, Fraser, look up in the stand." And I looked up and I saw my mum and dad sitting in the stands, and I just nearly died. So I didn't even know that they were there. The people of Balmain had made a fundraiser and sent mum and dad down and kept them in hiding all the time and until I swum. And it was just a beautiful moment. I'll never forget it.
The Olympics reflected well on the sort of society this was and on our way of life. We weren't like England. We were not a classist society. We had no social distinction at all, other, of course, than whether you were good at sport or perhaps you weren't an Australian at all.
Australia leading. It's Australia half a length in front. Australia a length in front. Australia still a length in front. 20 metres to go. It's Australia. Australia in white.
The intoxicating effect of all of this was greatly enhanced by the arrival of television.
There weren't too many television sets around in those days, so most people who watched it on television either went to television parties or they watched it through shop windows.
These were the humble beginnings of a beautiful friendship between television and live sport.
Rose, Australia.
I think we had, 3 or 4 cameras to cover the games in '56.
Third on both occasions.
Murray Rose contributed 3 gold medals to Australia's tally, something no swimmer had ever done before. He was also part of a moment that established the potency of sporting images to the media.
I'm swimming at the Olympic Games, and my main rival is Tsuyoshi Yamanaka-san. And we happened to meet each other in every heat and every final. And by the time we got to the last swim, we developed a pretty healthy respect and friendship. The last event at the Olympics in 1956 was the 1500. After we'd finished, we embraced across the lane line, and a photograph of that moment was taken and was picked up by newspapers all over the world. For one main reason, the date was the 7th of December, 1956, the 15th anniversary of the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor. So it became symbolic of 2 kids that had grown up on opposite sides of the war, had come together in the friendship of the Olympic arena.
Old enmities were put to rest in Melbourne. Fresh new ones threatened to spoil the party.
This match is a final round contest between the ultimate winners, Hungary, and the third place getters, Russia.
Of course, the water polo match between Hungary and the USSR became a very bloody event and amplified how politics and sport are so intermeshed. But on the other hand, it's a credit to, I guess, Australian political culture that was not allowed to get out of hand, that was not allowed to take the headlines. The headlines were really about the achievements of the athletes.
Hungary won that match 4-0.
There was nevertheless still some unfinished business with the Soviets. We looked after that too.
The Soviet Union reporters found out that we were doing secret training sessions, and Coach said, "I'm sick and tired of these Soviet reporters. I'm going to give you each a tablet."
The Go Fast pill. Gallagher's Go Fast pill.
We took the tablet and chewed it up and got down the blocks and said, "We're ready, Coach, to go." And Rixie and I got in and swam very fast. And we did some fast times because we were really not nearly at our peak. And the Russian journalists were writing down and they wanted to know what sort of tablet we'd taken and how, was it a Go Fast tablet and stuff like that. But it was only a Smartie, and it made really big headlines throughout the world.
That's why they were lollies.
We showed them. As if taking a tablet would make you go faster. How bloody ridiculous.
I declare the 1956 Olympic Games closed.
A nation of 9.5 million people had just hosted the biggest event in the world, saved the Olympics, done what it could for world peace and finished third in the medal count. No wonder Australians wanted more of this.
And of course, once we'd succeeded at sport, you know, appetite grows with the eating. Once we'd experienced victory, there was no substitute for it. The more victories we got, the more we pined for.
Another characteristic of the Golden Age would be that in the sports Australians were good at, they completely dominated, not just in Olympic sports. Between 1952 and 1958, Peter Thomson won the British Open 4 times. The other years he was a bit busy coming second. He would win his 5th Open in 1965. You might like to just go and check how many other people have done that. The other sport in which the British Open was the most coveted championship in the world was squash. Heather Mackay won the Open every year from 1962 to 1977. 15 years on the trot. I was going to ask you about the uses of being defeated and what you learned from a defeat, but you weren't very often defeated.
Twice.
Twice? What went wrong? Jack Brabham was winning Formula One championships. In tennis, things were going particularly well. From 1950 to 1967, under captain coach Harry Hopman, Australia won the Davis Cup 15 years out of 18.
Championship point for Labour for the 3rd time.
And Australians won Grand Slam titles every year. Most years, the winner knew the bloke up the other end because he was from Queensland as well.
This familiar scene.
Australia rules the world of tennis.
There must have been a reason for this. Why was all this happening? Why was Australia so good at sport?
Firstly, the physical explanation is we have a large country, plenty of room, very basically equitable climate, a high standard of living. We've had good meat, fish, fruit, vegetables, probably almost better than any other country in terms of the availability of high quality, good food at reasonable prices. And I think it's difficult to overestimate the importance of that factor.
Every weekend, thousands of boys and girls, men and women, turn out to play or watch social and competitive sports.
Here was a country with a small population, a growing national income, an 8-hour day, a sports program in the schools, and an unambiguous emphasis on the physical. Kids played sport all day, weren't allowed inside till it was dark. And if you promised not to tell anyone, in the 50s and 60s in Australia, there wasn't a lot else to do. There were plenty of other countries with sports fields and a healthy lifestyle. What lifted so many Australians into the elite class was coaching and mental toughness. In Australian swimming, coaches vied with each other to produce champions. In tennis and athletics, it was Harry Hopman and Percy Cerutty who first set up programs that were designed to train both your body and your mind. Herb Elliott's coach was Percy Cerutty.
I myself do not like the term coach as applied to me. I prefer to look upon myself as a teacher.
Percy saw me run, said that I'd break 4 minutes within 2 years, which I thought was absolute bullshit, and thought he was away with the fairies. But it turned out to be pretty close to right, I think. He wasn't eccentric, and even at the school, I remember after I'd run, he got all of the Aquinas athletes together to give them an address. And he started talking about flying, and he started flapping his arms up and down. But when you sat down and listened to him talking about his views, he was awe-inspiring. We didn't train to exhaustion every night. 3 or 4 only would be absolute full flat out. As near as death you could get without dying, because dying was unintelligent, we were told. But then the other nights, you'd run for 45 minutes and you'd just flow and experience the joy of running. And at that point, you became conscious of the skin being caressed by the breeze that you were creating as you ran through it, and you're floating across the ground. And yeah, you were euphoric almost in those sorts of days. So your punishment and euphoria, they were the sort of 2 main areas that you worked on. You might be on a 10-mile run, running up the second last hill where you've still got a quarter of a mile to go and you're laying it out and your voice is saying, mate, you're never going to get there. The finishing line, you're going to fall over and die before you get to the finishing line. That's when I would imagine a person on my shoulder, and I would imagine that person could see inside my soul, my mind and my body, my heart, everywhere. And they knew that I was at this weak moment and they were just waiting to go past me. And at that point, you just thought, well, no way.
When Herb began to run internationally competitive times in the 1,500 metres and the mile, he and Percy went on a running tour of the United States. They'd never seen Herb run, and they didn't believe a single word Percy said about his times.
They thought our tracks must be short.
40-year-old Australian left the field behind.
Herb didn't lose a race. Things were going nicely. He won the mile and the half mile at the Commonwealth Games in 1958, and he then broke the world mile record and the world 1,500 metres record. He was the epitome of the golden age athlete. Supreme physical fitness, mental toughness and self-belief.
Hopman and Cerity came along at a time when Australia had a great inferiority complex, what they call it the cringe effect or whatever it was, where if it was European or American, then it was greater than Australian. You know, we were sort of inferior in pretty well everything. And then you've got guys like Cerity and Hopman that came along and said, that's bullshit. You're as big, you're as strong, you're as healthy. What you're going to do is get your mind right, mate, and you can knock those people off. And they're just ordinary people, and you can kill them if you want to.
Harry Hopman's in there running too, and that's the answer. He's getting them fit for tennis.
In tennis, Harry Hopman built a new Australian attitude, and it didn't discriminate. You could start from anywhere.
My first tennis racket was a paling off the fence, and I used to hit up against the wall. And there was a friend of my mum's that came around and she saw me hitting up against the wall and she said, oh, I've got a big old tennis racket at home. And when she brought it around, it was a big old wooden one, but it had a very big grip on it. I could hardly get my fingers around it. But I thought my Christmases would all come at once. Jack Kramer, Gonzales, Frank Sedgman, Lou Hode, Ken Rose, they would come through Albury and, I mean, I was only little and they got me to give a little bit of a hit up before one of their exhibition matches. And one happened to say to me, you could be the first Australian woman ever to win Wimbledon. And somehow that gold dropped into my heart.
Margret Court won her first Australian Open when she was 17. Then she went to Wimbledon, where she was knocked out in the first round.
With all the pressure, all the press, I played Billie Jean and I lost to her in the first round. So I remember phoning home to my mum because my mum never really wanted me to go on the tennis circuit. And she said, I suppose you'll come home now and give tennis up. Because that was the goal, you see, to win Wimbledon. And I said, no, I'm going on to America. And I said, I'm going to win everything.
She won 62 Grand Slam titles. 62. Give us a whistle when Roger does that, or Rafter, or any of those other plodders.
Court gallops to net behind serve.
While the country could take confidence from the achievements of its athletes, it would be folly to assume it was going to keep happening just because they were Australian. With the 1960 Olympics looming, what would happen if the novelty of making other people feel better about themselves wore off?
I went back to uni, went to study and all that sort of stuff, and got married. And I just found all that a huge distraction from my sport. And I lost interest. It was really, really hard to just even go training. And Percy was getting furious because I wasn't doing the work. And he lectured me face to face, and then he used to write me virulent letters. And when I ignored all of that, he went to the press eventually and started saying, you know, Elliott's lazy, Elliott's finished, Elliott's this, Elliott's that. So he was attacking me in every possible way that he could to sort of put a bomb under me. And eventually I did get started. As the games got closer and closer, I had to make up my mind whether I was going to have a go or not have a go.
Australians turned up to the 1960 Rome Olympics, which were in Rome, very confident. Not overconfident, But we were coming off some pretty big wins in Melbourne, and the form guide was extremely encouraging.
Un'altra attesissima gara femminile, i 100 stile libero.
Dawn Fraser, Murray Rose and David Teal were attempting to defend swimming titles they'd won in 1956. No one had ever done this before.
L'Australia da Dawn Fraser.
All three would succeed.
Col tempo di un primo, un secondo, 2 decimi, Dawn Fraser eguaglia il record mondiale.
And Herb Elliott had decided he would show up, but he was slightly more worried than he looked.
When I got to Rome in 1960, I think I was undercooked. To wake up feeling what you feel, what I felt anyway, in the nervousness before event, you'd ring an ambulance and go in this because something's not right.
9 runners, the 9 finest milers in the world at the moment.
The idea in the race was to follow a strategy which I always followed.
Finale dei 1500 metri all'Olimpico.
Which was to hang around third or fourth for a while, get a feel of the race, and slip to the front with a couple of laps to go and then beat them. The gun went.
And off they go, the 1500 metres.
This guy in a blue singlet charged out at 1 million miles an hour. I didn't even know what country he was from, much less who he was. He was a Frenchman.
And Elliott hasn't bothered to go straight away into the lead.
So he ran like a crazy man for about a lap and a half. And I knew the pace that he was setting was faster than I would have felt comfortable with if I'd been setting it myself. So when we got to the halfway mark, I felt pretty tired. And this was the point where I was going to make my move.
And where is Elliott? Elliott is, as we thought, lying very comfortably in 4th place.
Because I felt pretty tired, you know, my positive attitude was being challenged, and I expected the voice to come up to my head saying something like, "You've been training for 4 years, you've made huge sacrifices, this is the time for you to move and show the rest of the world what you're made of."
A very fast race already.
It wasn't that voice that came up into my head at all. This voice came up and said, "Herb, you're buggered." So there was a negative voice suddenly emerged, so powerful. And it advised me very quickly to change my strategy. It said to me, "You're buggered, you idiot if you go to the front right now. You hang back here in 2nd or 3rd place and just see how you go for the next 3/4 of a lap. Don't take the risk of going to the front." And because in my training, every day that voice was talking to me, and in my training I had learnt to totally ignore it, not easily, but ignore it, I instinctively ignored it in the race.
And Elliott has now got into the lead with 150 yards to go to the bell.
But if I hadn't practiced it 1,000,000 times in my training, it would have dominated my thinking in the race.
Into the straight he goes, into the back straight.
Percy said, "Now, I'm going to be sitting up in this part of the stand, in the back straight. And when you get into the back straight in the last lap, if you look as if you're going to break the world record, or you look as if you're going to get beaten, I'll wave the towel." So when we got to the last lap, and I'm in front, and I'm going down the back straight against the wind, so the wind's whistling past my ears. I can't hear how close my competitors are. I'm too frightened to turn around and have a look. All of a sudden, I see Percy waving this towel, and I almost stopped to think, shit, what is that supposed to mean? The thing that was a bit mysterious about it all was that Percy wasn't in the crowd where he said he would be. He had actually jumped the moat, which had these very severe, sharp spikes sticking out of it so people wouldn't jump the moat. And he had all these gendarmes sort of coming in like a V of gendarmes all coming into Percy while he was standing there waving his towel. And he was about as far away from me as that wall over there. Waving. He was right on the edge of the track.
And here comes Elliott into the straight. 100 yards to go. This magnificent Australia.
I sort of twigged then in this moment of lucidity that I had to run faster anyway, so that sort of...
Punching with his arms, looking easy and graceful. A lead of 15 yards over Yazzie of France. And Elliott has 10 yards to go. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. I knew that man was in a class by himself.
Herb Elliott had won the 1500 metres by the biggest margin in the history of the event.
I wouldn't have broken the world record if it hadn't been for that mad bloody Frenchman running so fast in the first lap and a half. Thank you.
Having done the thing that most matters in the world for an Australian, all Herb had to do now was work out how to make a living. Straight after the Rome Olympics, he went to Cambridge to study science, and he returned to Australia 3 years later.
I lived in Moorabbin and I caught a train to work every day with my little brown paper bag with my lunch in it. I was a very, very ordinary citizen. And sometimes I thought, was I that guy that they used to write about?
Australia finished 5th in the medal count in Rome. They were fit, they were tough, there was plenty of time to train, there was no fast food, and we were in a golden age. Maybe we were ancient Greece. Maybe we thought this was going to last forever. We weren't just in a golden age, maybe we were a golden country. What we didn't expect was that sport, which we loved, might show us things about ourselves that we didn't like. In the summer of 1960-61, Australia was treated to a famous cricket tour with a very famous first test with a very famous result.
All of a sudden you have 5 test matches against this incredibly vibrant, intoxicating, exhilarating and largely black West Indian team. Australia was still a fervent believer, in fact, in the White Australia policy. Here are individuals who we can play cricket against, but we couldn't offer citizenship to. These teams have played 5 days of topsy-turvy cricket, exhilarating cricket, the best quality cricket that you can imagine. And at the end of 5 days, in the final over, they have 737 runs each. I mean, the mathematical odds against that are astronomical.
In one of the country's most famous sporting photographs is captured the end of a game of cricket that highlighted the public's love of sport and the fact that West Indians could be invited here to play cricket as equals. They just couldn't live here on the same terms. In another famous cricket photograph, we see the Aboriginal side that toured England in 1867. There were 11 of them, although of course that wouldn't be known officially for 100 years because Indigenous Australians weren't included in the census till 1967.
I had 60 Aussie supporters in my corner on the night of the fight, about 3 rows back, and they kicked me on tremendously.
In 1968, Lionel Rose became the first Aboriginal Australian to win a world boxing title. He then returned, a national hero, to Terra Nullius. Perfect synchronicity between the national identity and what happened in sport ended completely in an incident that wasn't just unfortunate and discriminatory. It was a reminder that no Australian sports administrator had ever won the Nobel Prize in any category.
Lane 4, Fraser, Australia.
At the Tokyo Olympics, in Tokyo in 1964, the 100 metres freestyle was beginning to look like a benefit fixture for Dawn Fraser.
Beautiful start. Right away, Dawn Fraser pulls up front, lane number 4.
I settled myself down for the first 25 metres to enjoy the atmosphere and the pool. But the next 50 metres was to go hard into the wall, get a good turn, push off, come out hard for the next 25 metres. So the middle 50 was my fastest 50. And that's how I swum in Tokyo.
Dawn Fraser had just won her 3rd consecutive 100 metres Olympic freestyle title. It was difficult to imagine what could possibly stop her from doing it again.
We had a few beers, and then one of the guys who was the doc at the team at the time said, "Hey, Fraser, I know where there's some flags. This could be your last Olympics. Would you like to come and get one?" I said, "Yes, of course." Being the person I am, I would have loved to have a souvenir of an Olympic flag. We got caught by the police and we're taken to the Marinucci police station. And the detective sergeant couldn't believe it was me. He couldn't believe that Dawn Fraser would do something like that. And I just said, yes, she would. Yes, and it is me. So I had to ring up the hotel and get Lee Robinson to bring my passport, my gold medal down. So when he brought it down, they allowed us to go. And the next morning, he brought the flag in and gave it to me as a present. And that's how I got the Olympic flag. I should have asked for it in the first place.
Dawn was banned by her own swimming officials for 10 years. She was 27, so a 10-year ban is actually a Latin expression meaning banned for life. Dawn was apparently now the apotheosis of Australian sporting excellence and a national embarrassment. This wasn't just confused, it begged a question we'd never before dared ask. Did someone think there were going to be plenty more like Dawn Fraser? There was a tap somewhere, was there? It also highlighted another problem.
If I had been a bloke in those days, nothing would have happened. It would have been a slap on the back and good on you, fella, you know? And that was the difference, you know? I mean, the class distinction between males and females in those days was quite horrific.
We'd just ended the career of the most successful Olympian we'd ever produced for behaving like an Australian. This is the problem with Australians telling other Australians what Australian means. In the 1960s, the post-war boom babies were in their teens. They were the biggest generation in the country's history, and they were educated, healthy, confident, and an awful lot of them came from the suburbs where the nation's prosperity was reflected in conservative values, nice lawns and washable surfaces. For this new generation, sport might have been fun, but so was art, so was music, and so were new sports that better suited their lifestyle, like surfing. Mainstream competitive sport wasn't an alternative or a way out. It was part of the orthodoxy they were learning to question. They still loved their sport, but they were listening to Bob Dylan. They were marching against the arms race, opposed to the Vietnam War. And then there was the contraceptive pill.
He said, Ralph, what time did you get home last night?
Ralph Doubell somehow found a way past the distractions and chaos of the 1960s and produced one of the great commando raids ever conducted on sport. If he'd been wearing a Zorro mask, it could hardly have been more effective.
Finish work at 5 o'clock, hop in the car, up to Melbourne University, join with 2 or 3 others. We'd train for an hour and a half and then finish absolutely, gutted. Go home, have a meal, go to bed. That was life.
Ralph Doubell aimed himself at running the perfect race in the final of the 800 metres at the 1968 Mexico Olympics. As it happened, 1968 would be a year of revolution and turmoil. The Soviet Union invaded Czechoslovakia. Robert Kennedy was assassinated. Martin Luther King was assassinated. 10 days before the Mexico Games, there were huge student demonstrations in Mexico against the oppressive regime. The oppressive regime responded by shooting 40 of its own citizens. The atmosphere at the Mexico Olympics would be tense, and security would be tight. There would be 2 other issues facing athletes: water and altitude. Ralph had prepared for both of them.
I'd done some training at Falls Creek and Kosciuszko beforehand to get adjusted to it, and most of the tests showed that I acclimatised easily. Water was a problem. You didn't eat salads, you didn't drink the water, you didn't clean your teeth in water, you didn't wash with your mouth open. You just had to be very disciplined.
What did you drink?
Mostly beer and Coke.
What did you clean your teeth in?
I think it's mostly Coke.
Ralph and his coach, Franz Stamfel, had gone to Mexico together, and they'd gone with a plan.
The plan was simple. Stamfel said to me in Mexico, go and win the next 3 races. That happened to be the heat, semi-final and final. And I didn't like to just argue with Franz too much, so I said, OK, I'll do that.
Ralph Doubell got through his first race, and he got through his second, in which he found himself up against the favourite, the Kenyan, Kiprigat.
So I moved up to him, looked at him, said, nice afternoon for a run, and just breezed past him. And that really is the difference. You've got to control it, and you've got to put your stamp on it. And next day, he knew he had to beat me, even though he'd been favoured up to then.
The elegant Ralph Doubell of Australia moving up 4th.
I noticed in that final you're running in a white singlet. There's nothing madly overt about your being an Australian. You're an athlete. Did you realise you were carrying a nation's hopes and all that? Does that mean anything?
The Australian press didn't really give me much of a chance. Track and field news did. But I was out there doing my best, largely for myself.
And Kiprigat going even faster. Just surely no man can hold it. Kiprigat now with 80 yards left. And it's Doubell of Australia. Doubell is climbing, and Kiprigat is struggling. And Doubell is going to take the gold medal. Doubell beautifully executed right through. Doubell wins.
Just a good second.
No Australian has run faster over 800 metres than Ralph Doubell did at the Mexico Olympics. He went to those Olympics with one purpose, and if you want to know how to win a gold medal and equal the world record in the 800 metres, get your pencil out. This is what you do.
Just go out there, run the first lap flat out, then gradually increase your speed.
By 1972, Australian athletes had stopped running in white. They were cloaked in the expectations of green and gold. Whether this sped them up or slowed them down would be ascertained in Munich. The Munich Olympics would change everything. Athletes would leave for these Olympics in one world, but would return in another. When she went to the 1972 Munich Olympics, Shane Gould was 15. She held every women's freestyle world record. She would swim in 5 events, the 100, the 200, the 400, the 800 freestyle and the 200 individual medley as a bit of a warm-up on day one. Shane wasn't being asked to pick one event and win it, possibly twice or 3 times in a long career. She was being asked to throw a blanket over the whole swimming program.
You've got to have the determination to win, or else you don't win. You've got to have a killer instinct in you before you can win.
So this was the diary I kept in 1972 in the period of the Olympic Games. 200 IM final, 2:23.07, exclamation, exclamation mark 3 times. Gold medal in capital letters and Olympic and world record times. I've got a little word there, thrilled. I was very confident, about swimming and racing. That was pretty easy. But it was all the other stuff, the drug testing, doing the media interviews.
And Australia's Shane Gould winning the bronze medal.
After the 100 metres, in which she got 3rd, she was drug tested and media tested.
But we had to produce a urine sample. And, often at the end of a race, you just can't. You either haven't got any fluid in your system or you're just too wound up to release it. So that was the case with me, and I just had to wait till I produced a sample. In the meantime, the media went away without their interview and without their story, and were pretty harsh with me, with the headlines the next day, Shane fails.
Well, I did the best I could, and maybe I did attempt too many events, but it was certainly the biggest lesson of my life. I learnt how to lose.
Shane didn't like losing much, and in the 400 and the 200, she put the project firmly back on the rails.
The world record is 4:21.2, and Shane Gould is going to break that. There is no doubt at all. Shane Gould comes back in the most amazing fashion.
I think the 200 freestyle was the one that I did best at, and I think that a good time, a good race, I had to fight a bit for it. Shirley Babashoff was creeping up on me, and so I gave a kick, and just had a bit more juice in my tank than she did, a couple of seconds off the world record.
It's a new world and Olympic record for Shane Gould, and a 3rd gold medal, 2 minutes 3.56. What a swimmer!
After the swimming program, the girls could relax and enjoy their success.
Bev Whitfield and I went to the American girls' quarters, and we, told ghost stories and, ate Mars bars, which were, taboo but also very luxurious in those days, and had, pillow fights and things. And then about 2 or 3 in the morning, Keena Rothhammer, who'd actually beaten me in the 800 freestyle, we went for a walk in the tunnels, the supply tunnels underneath the village. And it was around about that time, around about 4 in the morning, that the terrorists were getting in place to go and do their terror.
The Arabs told them they would shoot the hostages if 200 Palestinians were not released from Israeli prisons. The Israeli ambassador, after consulting with his government, said there could be no deal.
Members of the Israeli Olympic team were taken hostage by Arab terrorists, and after negotiations failed to free the hostages, the German authorities mounted an attack and in the ensuing shootout, 11 athletes and coaches were killed. And all of this happened while the entire world was watching on live television.
I'm an Aussie. That sort of thing back then just didn't happen. And then, you know, as they murdered different people and they dragged their bodies out into the courtyard, it was, it was just disgusting. And it really, to me, I felt it would end the Olympic Games.
The shootout started when German snipers fired on 2 of the Arabs who had just checked the airliner in which they'd hoped to get away from Germany with the prisoners.
There's no doubt that the experience of Munich changed me. To have human beings killed at an Olympic Games, you know, I still find that very hard to conceive that human beings can do that to human beings.
Yeah, well, 11 people lost their lives and, you know, the Olympic Games were tarnished and the pleasure of watching it and being in it, you know, was certainly evaporated considerably.
Up to that point, the Munich Games were one of the best games I'd ever been to. They were just brilliant. The atmosphere was wonderful.
This was an attack on the Olympics themselves, and a decision was made not to allow them to be destroyed. The athletics went ahead as planned.
You can't just cave in to negativity. You can't just cave in to people who want to disrupt your life.
Regrouping for the sprint events on the track, Raylene Boyle found herself up against a remarkably large Renata Stecker.
We ran very fast. She broke the world record. I broke the world record behind her as well. It was a good run, but I looked at it and it just didn't make sense to me that this person, and I know you can be big and run fast, but there was a difference. There was a difference. And that whole East German thing was sad.
The first organised introduction of drugs, as I know it, was through the East German program. And it particularly helped the women because they developed a strength which was much greater than the average competitor.
Terrorism and drugs. International sport had lost its innocence. It no longer mattered that we loved sport. We were up against people who were building armies of nationalistic athletes who were representing large ideological differences. We didn't have large ideological differences. We had a healthy lifestyle. Shane finished the swimming program with 5 medals from 5 events. 3 of them gold, 3 world records, and half Australia's gold medals were won by kids from Turramurra High, Shane Gould and Gail Neal.
The Australian people and the Australian government didn't quite know whether to celebrate or mourn, and they chose, I think, to mourn. So when we came back, there was no parades like you have now. So my school put on a little parade. And so Gail and I sort of walked down and got a really, really lovely reception. It was really nice.
It was the greatest experience in my life, and I think we all realised that if we didn't have the Olympic Games where youth could meet, I don't know what the world would do. It's really great to be home again, and I'm looking forward to sitting in those science classes and the...
Shane sat her HSC, got 6 A's and retired at the age of 16. Halley's Comet had passed. We perhaps didn't realise, but the golden age was over. In Shane Gould's understanding of this remarkable experience, I reconciled her personal feelings and an understanding of the impact of what she achieved on others. She was 16. They were 16 million.
And I feel embarrassed a bit by that I did affect people that much. But also I feel a responsibility to that. And so it's like a sacred thing. And a privilege, a huge privilege. And I don't think I'm anyone special in that sense, but I've had that experience, and I think, well, I'll just honour that,
And like the athletes before her, she got on with other things.
And sometimes I hear my name, Shane Gould, and I think, oh, yeah, that person, And I gave birth to my first son in that bathrobe.
Did you?
Yes.
Next time on Sporting Nation, Australia comes away from the Montreal Olympics with no gold medals.
I always say I was part of the most unsuccessful Australian Olympic team ever.
Crisis. We could change the name of the country, or we could become underdogs.
You are the worst in the final if you're in lane 8, so therefore, obviously, you've got no chance.
As they say, when the going gets tough, the tough build an institute and go to the footy.